Good evening, all. Tonight, in my continuing review of various film noirs, I decided I'm going to do a brief review of the first couple, as it were, of film noir, Alan Ladd and Veronica Lake. As most people are aware of the fact that they did three film noirs together, those being This Gun for Hire in 1942, The Glass Key also in 1942, and The Blue Dahlia in 1946, but they actually did four. They also did Saigon in 1948, which is an often overlooked and rather underrated, in my opinion, noir. I'm going to dwell a bit on that because I just rewatched it last night to refresh myself with it, and it's really quite good. Um, but they started, of course, in This Gun for Hire. All these films are by Paramount, by the way. From This Gun for Hire, based on Graham Greene's novel of the same title. In England, it was called A Gun for Sale, but in America, it was called This Gun for Hire. And although there had been, I think, a radio adaptation, this was the first film adaptation, and it introduced Alan Ladd. Although that's a little bit deceptive. He had been some bit roles in some previous movies. But this was his first role as a main actor, and it's one of his best known roles, and really one of his best, I think. He became famous, of course, for the Western Chain, playing the character of the same name, but went on to do quite a number of other westerns. But I like him best in this role. I think he's fantastic in his portrayal of the rather strange anti-hero Philip Raven, who is a man of contradictions. He tenderly feeds a bowl of milk to a tiny kitten, and later he ruthlessly guns down an innocent secretary through a door. The same person has all these contradictions in him. He threatens to kill Veronica Lake, and then he goes out of his way to save her several times, not just once. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it's kind of a very interesting portrayal, and really his best, I think. The film also stars Robert Preston, Laird Krieger in a wonderful role as a fifth columnist, and Preston Sturgis, Tully Marshall as somebody who's actually, you hear the term milksop, you actually, milk toast, you actually see him taking a piece of toast and dipping it in milk. He's a real milk toast. And he's wonderful again in the role. Pamela Blake is a great kind of a sultry chambermaid. The story is, the film was directed by Frank Tuttle. It was really, very well done, very well written, very well edited. The soundtrack is good. The story is what's most interesting. The story is about this character, Philip Raven, who is a hired killer and an assassin. And the first scene we see is he wakes up in his hotel room in San Francisco, and he is feeding milk to apparently a feral kitten who has wandered into his hotel. And later we see the chambermaid, played by Pamela Blake, come in. She threatens the cat and says, get out of here, you dirty little cat, or something like that. And he smacks her and rips her dress. And then, she says, oh, you ought to buy me a new one, you big bully, or something like that. And he just kind of shoos her out of the way. You see him load a briefcase, and the other thing he puts in the briefcase is a 45. So already he's a baddie. He shows up at an address in San Francisco to a guy who's apparently a lawyer, and they make an exchange of supposed to be a formula of some kind of document. And the lawyer gives him the document, and he says, well, where's the money? He says, here it is. He pulls out the 45 and he shoots him. And then his secretary is there, and she screams and runs and locks the door. And he says through the door, basically, I'm sorry, they told me he was going to be alone, but he shoots her anyway. He has to. She's a witness. And then he goes and goes down to Los Angeles, meets with Laird Krieger, who is the person who hired him. And Krieger, again, is a kind of interesting character. He's asking all these questions about, how do you feel when you do what you're doing? He says, I feel fine. And he hates violence, but he's very interested in, the details of the killing. And Raven, just says basically, where's my money? He gives him the money, $10,000 in, I think, all $10 bills. When she objects to it, he said, that's all I could get at the time. Why don't you come to one of my shows? You can bring your girl if you have one. And Raven demurs. He doesn't have a girl. And later on, we see a scene of Veronica Lake's character, Ellen Graham, who's a singer and a magician. And she is being recruited by a senator. And what the senator wants is, they think that there's a fifth columnist somewhere in Los Angeles, and they want her to go undercover and go to one of their, they suspect it's Laird Krieger, and they want her to work at Laird Krieger's club, get herself hired, and spy on him, basically, and report, what he's doing. But she can't tell anybody, including her boyfriend, who's a policeman played by Robert Preston, and they're planning to get married. And there's kind of an interesting, scene with them at an amusement park, and then she's going on a train, and she can't tell him again anything about this undercover work that she's doing. The scene cuts to the fact that Raven, feels guilty about the fact that he ripped the chambermaid Annie's dress. So he actually does go and buy her another one at a dress shop on the corner. But meanwhile, what he doesn't know is that Laird Krieger has paid him in marked money, and the cops know about the marked money, and they submit the serial numbers to all the local stores. And the dressmaker's daughter says, "Oh, Mama, I feel sick. Look at the numbers." And the $10 bill that he paid her with is one of the marked bills. Alan Ladd Raven gets wind of this, and now he's out for revenge. So he travels from Los Angeles, or San Francisco, he's still in San Francisco, back down to Los Angeles to confront, Laird Krieger about, giving him the dirty money. Meanwhile, an alert has gone out about him, which Laird Krieger has put out, that says he says that he killed a paymaster and stole all this money from their company, which is a chemical company. And that's not true, of course, but the police think it is. And he gives him a description. Raven has a bent wrist, which is very unique, and it'll be easy to identify him. So he's on the train, and he incidentally sits next to Veronica Lake, who's also on the train. In a kind of an interesting interchange between them, he pretends that she's asleep, and he pretends that he's asleep, and sneaks a $5 bill out of her purse, rather, and she's not asleep. She knows he did it, and when he comes back from the washroom, says, "Okay, give me the money." And are you really that desperate? And he hands it back over, but reluctantly. And there's like a little, she says, "Well, if you're so desperate, I can lend you $1." And he says, "Oh, forget it," or something like that. So they're sort of inimical at the beginning, and then as they roll into the Los Angeles station, to Union Station in Los Angeles, the cops are looking for this character, Philip Raven, with the bent wrist, and he kind of cajoles her into helping him. I think he shows her the gun, basically, forces her into helping him. Excuse me, I'm sorry, it's a hot day. She reluctantly goes along, and they take a blanket and pretend that they're holding a baby, and that covers his arm, so nobody can see that he has this deformed wrist. And as they're getting off the train, it looks like the cops are closing in. Basically, they think the jig is up, and then they spot somebody else who's got it, and they say, "We found him! We found him!" And they run, down the platform, and it turns out it's a guy with a cast on his hand, and Laird Krieger says, "No, that's not him at all! You idiots! You let him get away." Well, Ladd and Lake end up in like a disused railway yard, and it becomes evident that she doesn't really need him anymore, and she says, can I be on my way now? And it becomes apparent that he can't let her go. He's going to kill her, and he asks her to kneel down and close her eyes. And then two kind of stumble bums come in and ruin that plan for them, so they have to keep going on. And he can't kill her, and she does something. Something happens, and she runs away and gets away from him. Meanwhile, he's now going to track down Laird Krieger. She goes to Laird Krieger's club and auditions with this song and routine where she vanishes behind a fan. It's a really good song, and she's wearing again a really elegant dress designed by Edith Head, who designed her dresses in all four of these movies. Veronica Lake was a very short person. She was 5'2", and so was Alan Ladd, which is why they kind of got along together. But the dresses that Edith had designed for her made her look tall and slick and sleek and elegant and very beautiful. She had a very busty figure, and the dresses always emphasized that. And long, gorgeous legs. But she gets the job. Krieger's eyes basically bug out of his head when he sees her, and he's entranced. So he hires her to work at this new club that he's starting called the South Seas Club, and she's got something called a fishing number. He says, "Well, that's great. That'll fit right in with the club." Somehow, I think it gets back to Krieger that they were together on the train, and he starts to think that she's Raven's girl, and he starts becoming frightened, and doesn't really know what to do about it. He wants to take her out to dinner, and she's a little wary, but again, because of this job she's on to spy on Krieger for the senator, she agrees, and they go out to dinner, and she tries to call Robert Preston. He's not available, to kind of warn him about that she might be in danger, even though she can't divulge any of the details of what she's doing. Krieger, takes her out to dinner and offers her some wine and obviously drugs her, and she passes out, and he has his kind of stooge tie her up, and he's gonna throw her into the river, and they're gonna she'll drown, and they'll think it's a suicide. Well, meanwhile, Raven has been trying to track down Laird Krieger to have his revenge, and he has seen her go into the house, but he hasn't seen her come out. So he thinks they're in cahoots, and it's ironic because the reason that Krieger kidnapped her was that he thought she was with Raven, and he breaks in as the henchman is getting ready to do away with her. Raven breaks into the house, knocks the henchman out, pushes him down a flight of steps, and locks him into the basement. He finds her stashed in a shoe closet and rescues her. And they kind of go off. He drives her back into the city. They kind of come to an agreement that if she helps him nail this Krieger and his boss, played by Tully Marshall, Tully Marshall's the president of this chemical company, that she'll help him find Laird Krieger, but she also, begs him not to do any more killing, and asks him a little bit about his life, and he tells her about his aunt who burned him with an iron when he was trying to steal a piece of chocolate when he was just a little boy, and that's how his wrist became deformed, and how he hates her and has this terrible dreams about her, nightmares every night, and that's why he doesn't like to sleep. There's an almost sexual tension between, overt actually sexual tension between them. It's sort of implied that they might have had sex, though it's not really, obviously for 1942, they're not going to show anything. They don't even kiss, really, but there's sort of even though they're sort of enemies, they're sort of friends, too, because he's kind of broken down and confessed to her, and she realizes that he has something of a submissive nature. He can be manipulated by women, and she takes advantage of this and makes him promise that he won't shoot anybody, and that she'll lead him, do what she can to lead him to Laird Krieger. So she goes on, she does the fishing number, and nobody's really anything the wiser. And you know, they she I think still again trying to call her boyfriend Preston Sturgis, and is still unsuccessful. Um, Meanwhile, he has actually come to town on to trace the thing about the stolen money. Uh, and again, he's been put on to the fact that this character, Philip Raven, is a killer, and he may know something about it. So now there are like kind of three people in this sort of an odd triangle. Um, then as things go out, I'm not going to spoil it for you and tell you everything that happens, but he ends up, Philip Raven ends up, doing a good deed for her, and he's basically, in the end, he's killed. But he says, "Did I do good for you?" And she says, "Yeah." And he smiles. So he considers, himself to have been a success. Um, that film was a huge hit. People really liked Ladd and Lake together, so they quickly, wanted to do another one. The film they chose was called The Glass Key, based on the Dashiell Hammett novel of the same title, also produced by Paramount in 1942, directed by Stuart Heisler, and starring also Brian Donlevy and William Bendix. And that's kind of a more intricate tale. It's interesting. It's about it follows the novel pretty closely, and it's about Alan Ladd plays sort of the front man for a corrupt politician by the name of Paul Madvig, and that's Brian Donlevy. And he is called, in the book, it's Ned Beaumont. For some reason, they changed his name to Ed Beaumont. I don't know why they did that in the movie. I don't know why they changed Ned to Ed, but they did. And he also has a rival, but he wants to get this Senator Henry elected. Well, Senator Henry's son is mysteriously killed, and this sort of puts a kibosh on the plans of getting him elected, because people are curious, what happened, and was his son an alcoholic? Was he mixed up with this rival of his? Was he planning to back the rival or give him money? Something like that. They don't really know what's going on. And meanwhile, Paul Madvig is engaged to Janet Henry, who's played by Veronica Lake, and in investigating what goes on, Alan Ladd becomes embroiled with the henchman of this rival of Paul Madvig's, and he's kidnapped. He's beaten up by William Bendix, who takes a sort of a sadomasochistic glee in beating him, and people suggested there's a little bit of a homoeroticism in there. I didn't particularly see it. But, it's possible that might have been woven in there, even if it was unintentional. It's a good movie. Eventually, they don't really show it a lot, and I should mention Veronica Lake doesn't really appear in a lot of scenes in the movie. You see her a few times as a very marginal background character, but she's always dressed in, again, these gorgeous Edith Head dresses, and in one she's wearing these long white silk gloves, which look really terrific on her, because she had long, slender hands, and a very tight white lame dress of some sort, which again hugged her figure very attractively. Looks beautiful. Her hair is gorgeous. I think that's one of the first ones where she wore her hair over her eye, though I think the first time she did that was in an earlier film. She says, by the way, that was accidental. She was making a movie, and they were using a wind machine, and the wind machine blew her hair over her eye, and before she could, she was going to brush it out, and the director said, no, leave it that way. And she did, and the audience liked it, so she kept that look. She had to change that during the war, because women were imitating her look and getting their hair caught in machinery when they're working in war production. So she told them, don't wear it like this. Anyway, that was a fairly successful movie. Although a previous version had been done in 1931 with George Raft. I've seen that version. It's kind of it's okay. It's not great. Not one of Raft's better roles. The third movie they did together is probably one of the most famous, The Blue Dahlia. If nothing else, because Alan Ladd's not really the bad guy, though you think he is for a while in this one. And again, I won't spoil it totally for you. But Alan Ladd plays a typical film noir character, the grizzled war veteran who comes home and he's disillusioned. He finds out his wife is a drunk, and played by Doris Dowling, and she's having an affair with a nightclub owner, and always throwing these wild parties. Has become something of a well-known, bimbo sort of character, and he gets mad and walks out on her. And later she's found murdered, apparently with his Army Service 45. And for a long while, you think that it's might be one of his friends, William Bendix, because he had this thing about loud music. He doesn't like. He's got a metal plate in his head, and it drives him crazy when people play jazz music. He calls it monkey music, and you think that maybe he might have done it because there was some loud music playing on the night that she was murdered. But that's a red herring, and it turns out to be somebody completely different. Again, I won't tell you who it is, but it's somebody you'll never expect. It's well written. It was written by Raymond Chandler, actually, who had developed during this time an intense dislike for Veronica Lake because she would show up late. She'd often be drunk. She'd forget her lines. He started referring to her as Moronica Lake, which I think is funny. But in other ways, it's not really, because it has sort of a sad ending, as you know, her career ended early. She died at only 46, basically from alcohol poisoning. Was a major drunk. Didn't get along well with a lot of the people on the set. Ladd and her seemingly got along well. They were kind of the exception. The fourth film, which I'm going to go into in a little more detail, because as I said, it tends to be skipped. People seem to ignore it, or maybe aren't aware of it, and that's Saigon from 1948. This film was directed by Leslie Fenton, and it was written by P.J. Wolfson and Arthur Sheikman from a story by Julian Zemay, and it stars Ladd and Lake and Wally Cassell, Douglas Dick, Morris Karnofsky in a wonderful role, and Luther Adler also fantastic in this movie, and a very sinister character played by Louis Van Houten. Van Ruten, I'm sorry. And it's a kind of a convoluted plot. Alan Ladd plays a character named Major Larry Briggs, and he's just come back from World War II. It starts off in Shanghai in a military U.S. Army Air Force hospital. And his friend, his co-pilot, Captain Mike Perry, his doctor tells him that despite having a brain operation, he only has about 3 months to live at maximum. The damage to his skull was just too great. And Ladd tells him, don't tell him I want to break it to him my way. And he says, okay, and he agrees with it. And he goes to meet his other cohort from this bomber crew, Sergeant, and that's the guy played by Wally Cassell, played Pete, and he's kind of a Joker character. He's the comic relief character. And he's saying, well, what's going on? And he tells him about it. And he says, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to tell him? He says, we're not going to tell him. He says, what do you mean we're not going to tell him? He's going to want to go home. He says, we're not going to let him go home. We're going to, show him the best time of his life. We're going to, show him the Orient and show him the sights and get in 100 years of living in that 3 months. He says, well, that's going to take money. He says, yeah, I know. You remember that job I was talking about a couple months ago? I think I'm going to take it now. And it turns out the job is to fly this kind of shady gangster type character played by named Alex Maris, played by the wonderful Morris Karnofsky, who always played a great villain. Really great at playing these oily, slimy, villains. Was also really good in Affair in Trinidad with the gorgeous Rita Hayworth. But he wants him to take him to Saigon, and if he takes him, he'll pay him $10,000, no questions asked. And he says, yeah, that's fine, I'll take it. He says, I want you to take me be at the airport tomorrow at exactly 6 o'clock. Not 6:05, not 6:10, not 6:15, 6 o'clock. He says, 6 o'clock it is. You want 6 o'clock, I'll be there. He tells his buddies, and they go to the airport. And then, Mike Perry he's a little curious. Why are you doing this now? And he sort of hems and haws and says, don't you want to see a little bit of the world first before you go home? And he sort of cajoles him into going. He still hasn't told him that he's dying, and he doesn't plan on doing it. So they meet. They go to meet Alex Maris at the airport. They find this really beat up old Lockheed Ventura that looks so old. It looks like a PV-1. It's like the first version of the plane, and he has his mechanic, who is Pete Stone, the Wally Cassell character, check over the plane and make sure it's flight worthy. And he makes jokes about it. He doesn't think it's a plane. He thinks it's the crate the plane came in. But he can get it off the ground. 6 o'clock rolls around, and Alex Maris isn't there. And instead, his secretary, Susan Cleaver, played by Veronica Lake, shows up and says, take my bag and put it on the plane. And, they're being kind of standoffish, but they're like, who are you? We were waiting for Maris, not you. Says, I'm his secretary. And, do as I told you, put my bag on the plane. And they go ahead and do it. And they're waiting and she says, don't worry, he'll be here. And she says, there's his car. His car's driving up, and all of a sudden you see the police intercept the car and start shooting at him. And a gun battle ensues. Ladd says, let's get out of here. I'm not standing around while people are shooting. And Veronica Lake is saying, wait, he hired you for $10,000, and says, well, that doesn't include bullets. And they start taking off, and she won't let him go. And finally, they grab her into the plane, and Pete kind of knocks her out, and they take off. And meanwhile, Mike has kind of taken a shine to her because she's pretty, and he's kind of trying to chat her up a little bit. Even though she's being very inimical and saying I hate you, and you were supposed to wait for Mr. Maris, and kind of I'm hungry, and what do you got on board? And said, well, we don't have any food, but we've got some champagne. And she eagerly starts drinking the champagne. Alan Ladd starts writing her about, gee, it's amazing the thing they teach in secretarial school. Says, what are you implying? He says, nothing. And they're kind of at odds with each other, as they are pretty much throughout the most of the movie. But the plot develops. They are flying towards Saigon. Something goes wrong with the plane. One of the engines flames out, and they have to make a crash landing. Still in Shanghai, and they do, and they end up in like a rice paddy. They don't know what they're going to do, and it turns out that Veronica Lake's character speaks Chinese, so she talks to some of these farmers, and they tell her how they can get to Saigon. They can take a horse cart, and then there's a boat that will take them, and they do that. And in Saigon, they attract the attention of a Eurasian policeman, Lieutenant Keon, played by Luther Adler, as a very interesting, sort of a Columbo-type policeman who just senses that there's something wrong about these people, and he's dogged in his pursuit of, he doesn't know what it is. They check into a hotel in Saigon. He tells them where it is. And you see, again, there's kind of this inimical relationship between her and Ladd. She wants her own room. There are only 2 rooms available, so Ladd insists that all 3 of the guys sleep in one room, and she's going to sleep in the other room. And she goes in and locks the door, and the hotel clerk tells them they have to fill out these police cards for the police that tell them, their name and their address and how much money they've got, and ask some kind of impertinent personal questions, where they live, that kind of thing, and how long they're going to stay in Saigon. And they go ahead and do this, and meanwhile you see that Veronica Lake has a briefcase, and she won't let anybody see it, and won't let anybody see what's in it. You find out that she herself does not have a key to the briefcase. She takes a nail file and forces it open, and opens it up, and it's filled with money. And from that point on, I don't know what happens. Somehow Alan Ladd, kind of breaks into her room, and sees this briefcase and, realizes that, she kind of lied to them about what she was doing. She says, well, he didn't tell me what was in it. He only said it was important. He says, oh, sure, I don't believe that. You're getting out of here right now. And takes the briefcase, throws it out the window, says, you can get that on your way out. She storms off, in a huff. And the next day, they wake up and he tells Mike some, cock and bull story about how, she just took off. And he's kind of crestfallen because even this early, he's kind of starting to fall for her. And you don't know why, because he doesn't really know anything about her except her name. And, she's kind of smart-mouthed and sassy and, doesn't really treat them very well. But there's something, he likes about her. And Alan Ladd had told her to go onto this boat, to take them into Saigon. And that they would, they were left at dawn. And he goes onto the boat and asks the captain, who's rather drunk, have you seen a short, kind of attractive blonde? And he says, yeah, she's in stateroom B. And, he goes and he makes kind of a devil's bargain with her. Because he knows that, about the money now. And says, unless you want me to go to the police, unless you want me to go to tell Lieutenant Keon that you're, carrying $500,000 in a briefcase, I want you to be nice to Mike. And he likes you. And she kind of agrees to this very reluctantly. So now they got this thing going on where, she tells Mike some story about, she didn't want to get them in trouble, which is completely made up, because of the police fight at the airport. And he buys it. The boat breaks down and Pete has to fix the engine. And Mike goes down and they all go down to watch him. And Lieutenant Keon included, who's, again, become very suspicious of them. And he tells me, some people made a lot of money in this war, and they talk about war profiteers, and some of them think they can launder their money through my country, and I want to let them know that they're not. They think it's safe, that they're not safe. This is not a safe haven for laundering money. So he suspects something, and even though Alan Ladd kind of comes to Veronica Lake's defense when he says, I didn't see her police card, he said, oh, I held on to it. And he shows her this police card that she's filled out that says she only has $78 with her. He says, oh, you must not be planning on staying in Saigon very long. And she says, why do you think that? He says, well, Saigon is the Paris of the Orient. A young lady of your taste and style couldn't last very long at $78. Says, oh, I've got some friends in town who are going to lend me some money when I get there. Again, a complete lie, which Keon doesn't buy. But he goes down. They convince him to go down with them and watch the boat repairs. And Alan Ladd says, keep him down to Pete. Keep him down there as long as you can. He goes to Veronica Lake's room and finds the briefcase with the money, takes it out, puts it in a plain brown paper wrapper, as it were, addressed to himself, to general delivery in the post office in Saigon, and gives it to the boat's postman to put in the mail. Lieutenant Keon inspects not her quarters but his, looking for the money. Doesn't find anything except his service medals and his honorable discharge, and he's now embarrassed, and apologizes. And now he kind of believes the story that she's innocent and didn't really know anything, doesn't have this money on her. Things develop. They get to Saigon and they're staying in a really nice hotel. Mike is starting to fall, pretty hard for Susan, the Veronica Lake character, and they dance, and again she appears in this gorgeous dress, again designed by Edith Head. That's is not quite strapless, but the straps are sort of cut so you can see her shoulders, and very slimming, and again emphasizes her buxom figure and her long legs, and it's really a gorgeous dress, and again has long white gloves, and they're all dressed in evening clothing too, and in white tie and tails, and they go out to dinner and the dance, and Mike is dancing with Veronica Lake, and she's dancing with Alan Ladd for a while, takes him out onto the balcony and says, I need to talk to you for a minute. And she says, Mike deserves better than me, and, I'm not his kind. And she says, Alan Ladd says, well, what kind are you? She kisses him and says, this kind. You and I are both, kind of rats. We've seen the world. We know it's kind of rotten. And, Mike is innocent, and he doesn't really deserve that. And he says, well, that's not what I'm paying you for. I'm paying you to be nice to him, and he still likes you, and blah, blah, blah. And she's nonplussed, but she kind of goes along with it. Meanwhile, as the film becomes more noir, of course, more, as things roll along, and Mike asks her to marry him, and she says, I need time, and tells, I forgot, there's a key point here. When the boat repairs are being done by Pete, Mike passes out from the heat, and the captain says, leave him here, he needs to rest for a minute. And when he comes back up, he tells Ladd and Lake, you need to take that boy home as soon as possible. Veronica Lake says, why? He says, any person should be taken home when they're dying. So now she knows he's dying. He still doesn't because they haven't told him. Morris Karnofsky inevitably shows up at a bad moment, starts threatening Lake and Ladd. He wants his money, and she says, I don't have it. And he says, but Major Briggs does, don't you? And, he says, yes, and I said it to myself at the post office, but I have to pick it up, and I can arrange it in the morning. He says, well, he's got his henchman with him, who's armed, and he says, well, played by Louis Van Ruten, and he says, we'll just sit up all night until it's time for you to go get the money. Or I could just go ahead and, tell your friend that he's dying, and then there won't be any need for that. He said, no, it's okay, I'll get it. Veronica Lake sneaks out. You don't know where she's going. And then, as the evening wears on, he locks the door, to lock them in. And Pete shows up and he knocks at the door. And the henchman, goes over to, silence him. I think he's going to, cold cock him with a gun. And he and Pete struggle. They fall off the balcony. And they struggle for the gun. And, Pete gets him and shoots the guy, but he's broken his neck in the fall. So they're basically both killed. The cops showed up, and they give them kind of a cock and bull story about they were arguing on the balcony. They don't know who they are. They're not familiar with them. They don't know why they were fighting. And meanwhile, Morris Karnofsky, Alex Maris, wants the money, and Susan shows up with it. She's got the package that he had that Alan Ladd had sent to himself, but she's also got Lieutenant Keon with her. And Lieutenant Keon says, the jig's up, Maris. We know all about you. She's been working with Keon all along. And so they end up in a gun battle, and thinking that Karnofsky is threatening Susan, Mike jumps in and he's shot and killed. And that, ends things rather tragically for them, but now she and Briggs can be together, and the final scene, they're at Mike's funeral, and she says, don't blame yourself, this had to happen, and they walk out arm in arm. I liked that film. I thought it was very well done, it was very well written, well acted. The attraction between Ladd and Lake was just as strong as it was in this Gun for Hire, if not even stronger, although I think maybe the audience didn't like it because their characters didn't like each other pretty much throughout the entire movie. They're distrustful at each other. At one point, he says, I'm sorry, I can't join you in a glass of rat poison, when he finds out she's working with Morris Karnofsky. And of course he knew that all along. He was her secretary. But it did well at the box office. Actually, it made over $2 million. But for some reason, Paramount became dissatisfied, probably because of Veronica Lake's ongoing drinking problems, and they terminated her contract. And that was basically the end of her career. Alan Ladd went on to do Shane and many, many more movies, but her career was effectively over, with the exception of a few minor appearances in a couple of really schlocky horror films at the end of her career before she passed away at age 42, I believe. Again, four very good noirs, and I highly recommend all of them, particularly Saigon. I had to watch it because it's not generally available on OKRU, which is a Russian channel. I'm a little ambivalent about Russian things right now because I completely disagree with the war in Ukraine, and I don't like to support them. But that's where you can find it. I'm sure it's available, however, through other services, and it's well worth watching. I recommend it. I recommend all of them, particularly this Gun for Hire is terrific, and I believe you can watch that for free on YouTube. I think all of these are available on streaming, and in very good quality. Again, the copy of Saigon I saw was not the best quality, but it's still, thoroughly watchable. And again, I recommend it. Okay, thanks, and good night, and have fun.